All right, I think we are live. Robin, I feel like whenever I do these LinkedIn podcasts, that I say I'm so excited about this, and I've been thinking about it. But this one, honestly, has been very personal for me and very interesting for me. So first, for everybody who's joining us, please help me welcome the award-winning, provocative, brave, bold author, Robin DiAngelo, who wrote last year's bestseller that became the Bible for everyone as this country was dealing with its racial reckoning, but the author of White Fragility. So Robin, thank you for joining us. And I am really excited about the conversation. So first, let me say that I didn't read the book last summer. I think I told you that when we talked. And I'm the only person who didn't read it. And I think I was just too angry. I was too frustrated. And I was like, I don't want to hear what the excuse is. I don't want to hear what you're working through. And so I didn't read it. So I've been speed reading it. And I found myself throughout almost every chapter. I was like, yep, check. And so you really captured it. So first, let me ask you, why did you write the book? What prompted you to even want to address this?
Well, for the last 25 years, this has been my field of work and study and research. And I've been writing as an academic, peer-reviewed articles over the years. And White Fragility was one of those articles. I thought it disappeared in some journal somewhere and nobody actually read it. But one day somebody quoted extensively from it in social media, and it exploded virally. And worldwide, I began to get emails from people around the world saying, you have articulated, from people of color, you have articulated an experience that I have, but I couldn't put my finger on. And white people like, oh my goodness, I can see this now. And so I wanted to make it more accessible, to get out of kind of that academic realm, because it was also kind of academic speak, and publish it in the mainstream. And I knew that it would be successful in the sense of being, there was already an audience for it, but I couldn't have dreamed that it would have resonated to this degree.
I think like so much of what we've experienced over the past 18 months, there has been a hunger and a need and an appetite to have this conversation. And the timing of the book probably just tapped into that, where people were starting to think more about it. So you had so many themes, but I want to focus on a couple of them and hear directly from you, so your perspective and what you were thinking. One was this concept of belonging. And it resonated because we at Edelman did maybe 4 weeks ago, a week of belonging, and we talked about what it means. And I personally, I shared this with my brother-in-law. I'm married to a white man. I've been married to him for over 30 years. He is the most significant thing in my life besides my children. But I've had to bring his family along on this journey. And they are different people now than they were before. And let me just say, I didn't have to bring them on. We were going on the journey and they chose to come on it, because I'm not about bringing anybody along. That's not my business. It's not my job. But we were at an event, and apropos, I was the only person of color there. And I said to my brother-in-law afterwards, and I said, you walk into every room and you never have to worry about whether you're going to fit. I said, I've been with you all for 4 days. I've seen one other person of color. We were vacationing. And I said, so imagine how that makes me feel. And you don't even have to think about it, but you captured that so well. Talk more about it.
Yeah, that concept of belonging and the power of absence. So the power of it not being an issue. It's just a non-issue. I'm not on any level consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to walk into this room and absolutely everything is going to reflect me, and my experience is going to be from my worldview as a white person, and it will be presented not as from any particular worldview, not representing any particular perspective. It will be offered up as objective,
Right.
as simply the human perspective. So I always get to be just representative of humanity, and you're always marked. An example I give is two filmmakers, right? So Robert Altman is this brilliant filmmaker who makes films about the human condition, and we all can relate to it. And then Spike Lee is a Black filmmaker. He makes films about Black issues. They're always limited. They're always biased. And when we're interested in that, we'll go see his films. But when we want universal stories that everyone can relate to, we'll go see Robert Altman. So by not marking that difference, that's not neutral, right? That's active. It's actively functioning. And one of the ways it's functioning is this relentless sense of belonging that is so expected and internalized that I don't think about it. But again, that doesn't mean it's not shaping the experience.
Right.
Where you are constantly thinking about it. And
well, sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. You know, what does Shelby Steele say? That being Black in America is like walking around with a pebble in your shoe. You're not aware of it all the time, but when you are, you are.
Yeah.
But it's always there. It's always there. So whether I'm conscious of it, whether I lean into it or not, varies on the space that I'm in, psychologically or physically. Right. But it's always there. The other thing, Robin, that you talked about is how whiteness is considered the standard. Yeah. It is considered universal, as you just said. And for X%, over half of the country, that's not our standard. It's not our standard of beauty. It's not our standard of being superlative. It's not our standard of right. But how do you shift people to understand that when that's all they've grown up with, including people of color? It's not just white people, but we were raised to think that this was the standard.
Yeah. You are also constantly judged by that standard, which you are not ever able to meet. I mean, that's built into it, right? And that's the power of implicit bias. And I know because you do your work in the workplace, you're well aware, there's just no question implicit bias is real. And part of it is that unconsciously I'm using white standards of beauty, of professionalism, of communication to judge you, right? And I might not be able to put my finger on why you're coming up short.
Yeah, right.
But it will happen so that you become an exception. Yes. Rather than the rule. And that pebble in the shoe, I appreciate your kind of reframing there, because it doesn't have to be at the forefront, but it's always kind of that peripheral. It's always part of it. Right. And as a woman, I'm a cisgender woman. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also white. I can absolutely relate to walking into a room that is all men, and I'm the only woman in the room. I may not be thinking about it the entire time, but on some level, I am aware of that. And it's shaping the interactions that I do or don't have.
Right. I want to go back and talk about white women, but I want to lean into what is a passion for me, and that is the workplace issue. So another term that you use is racial relaxation. And you say that white people can come to work and they can come in and do the work. People of color come in, and I've said this not as eloquently as you have written it, but that people of color or people who are different, i.e. in our society, not straight white men, but everybody else has to come in and they have to navigate who they are and then do the work, which, so you got two jobs. You get one job because you get to come in, and the rest of us have like 8 jobs before we can get to our job. How do you address that?
Yeah, there are two concepts that I think would be really useful here. One is allostatic load, and that is what happens when you're facing chronic stress, right? So PTSD is something like something happened in the past, it's over now, but when I'm reminded of it, I feel stressed. And part of how you treat PTSD, if I hope I'm saying the acronym right, is by helping the person see you're not in that moment anymore.
Right.
But systemic racism is chronic stress. So you are chronically carrying that allostatic load, and that leads to the concept of racial weathering. It wears you down.
Yes.
It is well documented, higher rates of blood pressure, heart disease, stress-related illnesses. We see the impact of COVID-19, that communities that are already weathered or worn down. And so you're carrying a load. Yeah, I leave work and I'm tired. But there's this whole other emotional and physical load that people of color, particularly when they are one of the few in a workplace, are carrying. And then we wonder why they don't stay, right? We recruited, but we can't retain. Well, you didn't address the water.
Right.
And so what you're doing is you're putting people of color into hostile water.
Right.
And it can be very subtle. And one of those places is this resentment so many white people feel when there are people of color let into the workplace, right? That you're unqualified, you're a diversity hire, we had to hire you, we're lowering our standards. I feel threatened. What's going to happen to my position? I have to compete now with a whole group of people I never had to compete with before. All that's going on too. Right. And you can feel it. If I have that resentment and that sense of threat, you're going to feel it from me, whether I will ever admit that I have it or not. So that's just one concrete example. And I think most white people know that when you're not around, there are conversations going on about this diversity stuff and the lowering of the standards and all of it.
It's the implicit, we chuckle about it, that when you talk about a candidate and it's like, Robin is so good. Yeah. And then when you talk about Lisa, it's like, she's actually really qualified. Yeah. It's like, I know that, but you didn't say that about Robin, but you felt the need to qualify my skills by saying I'm really qualified. And of course, our favorite, she's so articulate. Yes. She's very personable, that sort of thing, which means I'm not, perceived as, I'm not saying I'm not, the angry Black woman. But you carry all of that with you.
Yeah. And since, again, the workplace, one of the ways we cover not doing that is moving into fit. So if you are on a hiring committee and you're down to 2 candidates, and then all of a sudden the conversations goes into who would be the best fit, you're pretty sure that you've got a white candidate and say a Black candidate, and the white candidate will be seen as the best fit, can hit the ground running, won't need any extra support. There's so many assumptions built into the way we have these conversations. Yeah.
And Robin, and it's actually not fair also to the white candidate, because guess what? That person also needs support. That person also needs guidance. That person also needs a path forward. And so, in the assumption that you have to do all of this for the other candidate, it's what you have to do for all candidates that I think is fascinating. I don't know if you have seen our research, but after George Floyd was murdered, we did a series of research that talked about what is the responsibility of business when it comes to eradicating or eliminating racial inequity, the social justice platform, and so forth. So we've done 3 pieces of research. The most recent one was maybe 3 months ago. And the data point that was most interesting to me was the fact that 56% of those polled, when asked, where do you think racism is rooted? Is it some people are racist, or are our systems racist? And the feedback was 56% said it's individual people. Only 44% said systems. I disagree with that, because also I know that people make up the systems, but what's your reaction to that?
Yeah. So that taps into what I call the good, bad binary, this really simple formula of either or. You're racist or you're not racist. And if you're racist, you're bad. And if you're not racist, you're good. And a racist is someone who consciously doesn't like people based on race. If it's not conscious, it does, and intentionally seeks to harm them. Right. And you couldn't have come up with a more effective way to protect systemic racism than that definition. It also guarantees defensiveness, because I would ask any white person listening right now, especially if you're starting to feel a little defensive, my gosh, how can I be saying white people when I don't know you? I want you to ask yourself, well, what is the criteria by which I would grant that somebody's racist. I don't think many white people have actually sat down and thought that through. And if they do, I think they're going to come up with conscious, intentional dislike and wanting to harm people based on race, which is not me. And so therefore, I'm not racist. It's not my problem. And, the system keeps on keeping on. I'm very clear that I have perpetuated racial harm across my life. And I continue to do so, not as often. And, I'm very, very skilled at repair at this point. But not one moment of that was intentional or conscious. But the impact, nonetheless, was racial harm.
Yeah, you said something that makes it important for me to articulate. We all have racist tendencies. We all have groups of people that we tend to stereotype more than we do others, groups of people that we are not comfortable with. And but where it matters is if you were in a position of power. And very naively, when I was in college, I asked a question in my only racial class at my university. And I said, I know a lot of Black people who don't like white people. Are they also racist? And besides the fact the guy that I was dating thought I was so stupid that he broke up with me for asking the question, the real benefit of that was the professor said to me, it's where the power sits. So, Lisa, you cannot like Robin, but, what are you going to do about it? People like Robin run banks. They run universities. They run everything. So when they don't like you, the consequences are material.
Yes. And that is foundational to understanding racism is that distinction. So yeah, absolutely everybody has bias. So yep, they're just as biased as we are, right? You could automatically dismiss me because I'm white.
Right.
And I just call that bias. But systemic racism is what happens when one group's collective bias is backed with legal authority and institutional control. Now that transforms it. And so it gets infused and embedded across the entire fabric of the society and all of the systems. And an example I use is imagine a group of architects sitting around a table designing a building. When you picture them, you can assume not only are they probably all white, but able-bodied.
Yes.
There isn't going to be a person with a disability sitting at that table. So intentionally or not, they are going to design a building that accommodates the way they move through the world. And they are going to design a building that excludes. And they're not going to do that necessarily on purpose. But I want to add, it's not completely innocent that there are no people with disabilities at that table, because across our lifespan, we are given the message that they are less valuable than we are.
Yes.
We are separated and segregated from people with disabilities, and we avoid them, and we have, either mock them or feel like tragic towards them. And you put all that together, and you're going to make decisions at those tables that are going to advantage you and disadvantage people who aren't at the table.
So I love your focus on the table. I hope no one else can hear that echo. That just appeared. But one of the things that we've been talking about is the importance of setting the table. And what I've said to my colleagues is for any engagement we have for a client, that table has to be fully set. And if you sit down and the table looks like you got to get up, because that's not a table that is going to meet our clients' needs, because it's got to be fully representative. And then this concept of less than, I've done a lot of work in the space of people with disabilities and in workplace issues, but it's why I have had a personal effort to eradicate the word minority as it relates to people like us. And when I hear people say it, my head explodes. I'm like, we're not the minority. And when you look at yourself as a minority, it is less than. It is what's left over. You are not the dominant, but you continue to sort of perpetuate it. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, and don't remind me to talk about your new book too. One of the things that you talk about in your book is the language that we use and how our language either perpetuates or helps to eradicate racism. Talk more about that.
Well, language, I was raised to think about language. They're just terms and words and they describe things. No, the terms and words we have shape how we perceive things. And that's why language is always political and always a site of struggle, because most of the language that is used towards people that you would think of as in the minority group, which, by the way, people of color are the global majority.
Yes, emerging majorities is the word that I use. Emerging, and in this country, emerging majorities.
Most of the language was not chosen by the people that it refers to. So watch this. I'm in my 60s. And so we had words like bum, tramp, wino, hobo. Okay. And think about the images that those terms conjure up for you. And then imagine going to people and saying, I'm trying to raise money for the winos and bums. Okay. No. Right. And then think about the power of the word homeless, not houseless, by the way. Right. Homeless.
Right.
They don't have a home. Everyone should have a home. Home is where the heart is. And now I go to you and I say, I'm raising money for the homeless. Now, I'm not saying that when we change the language that we ended homelessness.
Right.
But I often would ask my students, if you worked with homeless people, would you put it on your resume? And they'd say, absolutely. Well, you don't put anything on your resume that doesn't make you look good. Right. So it changed everything when you change the language. And so, so people who haven't had to understand that can be put out. Oh, what do you want me to call them now? Yeah, yes. You're going to have to be slightly inconvenienced. You're going to have to get up to date. No, I won't stop saying white supremacy. I don't mean people in white hoods. And it's on you to educate yourself. Why are people who are very educated and involved in this work using that term? I thought it meant this. The answer isn't stop using that term to accommodate the fixed place I'm in. Yes. I need to get up to date.
Yeah, because up to date usually involves dignity and accuracy. Mm-hmm. The other thing is lazy. You know, but when you talk about literally somebody being without a house, that means that they are houseless. It has nothing to do with their home, which is very often in here. So, but it's accurate and it has a dignity that everyone should be afforded in whatever their circumstances are, I am very curious because you talked about the intersection of race and class a lot. And I've always had people historically say, Lisa, don't you think it's more of a class issue? I think it's more of a class issue. It's not really a race issue. And I'm like, I don't know. I was raised pretty upper middle class and I've faced racism throughout my entire life. I'm also better prepared to deal with white people and people who are not like me because I've been forced to, which I think is a benefit of people who, Black people, brown people, others who grow up as the other. We're forced to know the white world, where you are not forced to know our world because you don't have to. And so this is a great conversation, but I really want people to walk out of it feeling like, okay, I've got some tips and I've got some tools on how to operate differently. So besides changing the language, besides reading more and educating people, what are the other things that people can do to just be better, to be smarter, to be more aware?
Yeah. So I'm going to offer two questions. One is to change a question we tend to ask, and one is a new question. So, one thing white people can do is change the question from if I'm racist. Am I racist? Are you racist? What is going to be the answer to that? No, I'm not racist. So if that's my answer, then what further action is required of me? None. I'm not racist. Not my problem. I already know all that. Change the question to how am I racist? How has my life been shaped by my race, shaped by racism? If you grant, and I urge you to grant, that the default of this society is racism, by every measure across every institution, racial inequality is reproduced. That is not an aberration. That is the norm. Then to not actively challenge that is to collude with it. So rather than am I or am I not a part of the problem, ask how, right? How. And then the other question that's never failed me is, how does this function? This moves us out of, is this true or false, right or wrong? I don't know. Those are often deep questions. How does it function in the conversation when you, Lisa, bring up racism and I say, I think it's really about class? What happens in that moment? What have I just done? And what is basically I've taken race off the table. And silenced you and moved it into something that's so abstract and vague, that, it's not as if I could give you a class analysis. I just want to say this thing that silences the harder one. You can't separate race and class. You gave a great example. I always think Clarence Thomas could be he is on the Supreme Court, one of the most powerful positions in the country. And when he goes outside to hail a cab, he's a black man. Right. And there's a concept which is rank and status. And Professor Leticia Nieto makes this distinction. Rank are things that don't change, and status is temporary. So, for example, Barack Obama's status when he was president of the United States was probably the highest status of anyone, maybe in the world. His rank as a black man didn't change. And so he could have that level of power and still be experiencing racism all day long. And boy, are we clear that he experienced racism all day long. If Hillary Clinton had become president, her status would be high. Her rank as a woman, she would be dealing with sexism from all the men below her. So you can't really take race and class and separate them. And the reason I make a point of my background is to kind of push back on this. Well, I grew up poor, and so I have no privilege. Please look me in the eyes and tell me to be poor and white and poor and black is the same experience, and that your whiteness will have no impact on how you move out of poverty.
I love that. As I've talked personally about, I have a nephew who's now 40. My husband has a nephew who is 40. And for 30 years, we've talked about how their lives are different. My nephew grew up in a privileged, comfortable environment. Both of them did. But when my nephew walks into a store, and when Jeff's nephew walks into a store, they are treated differently. They are treated differently. And they're the same people on paper, but they are treated differently. I'm conscious of our time.
I know.
We needed an hour, but we'll have to do this again because in the time we have remaining, let's make a commitment to come back when your new book is out and tell us more about that. And then I just want you to fill in the blank here, because everything that we've talked about, I am an anomaly of. I was raised by HBCU grads who taught me to walk into every room with my blackness because it was my greatest gift. And I always have, and I'm so grateful for it. But as a Black CEO, as a Black woman CEO, fill in the blank for me. What are my opportunities? What are my challenges? What are my obligations? You don't need to tell me about my stresses. I know that.
Right. Well, as a Black woman CEO, don't use me as your diversity cover unless you're actually listening to me. Don't use me as the exception to deny the rule. Look at the rule. Don't put me on every committee for token diversity as long as I don't bring up racism and challenge, what you say. I'm here to help you see. So it's wonderful, but the implicit bias is still at play. Your rank is still at play, and it's on those who work with you to continually ask how they may be perpetuating an atmosphere that's not supportive to you. The 1,000 daily cuts that wear you down.
What's funny about it, Robin? So I feel like another affirmation of why I'm in the right place. Check, check, check. For Edelman, in terms of my comfort level, that's not the case. However, I am keenly aware that as we continue as an organization, that Richard started years before I came, about being a place where you can belong, where you are inclusive, where there is equal access and opportunity. I always know that there's a conversation about, the CEO is Black. I mean, do we have to continue to do this thing? I'm keenly aware of that. And that's something that we can talk about another time. So tell us about your book.
Okay. So let me just offer, rather than an
Yeah.
either or, racist, not racist, think about it as a continuum that we're all on, and I will be on across my life. So I don't arrive, oh, we have a Black CEO, I am not racist. In this moment, am I behaving in a way that either supports or challenges racism? Right. And I move along that continuum. Let's be honest. There are times when I choose silence and comfort over courage and integrity. And so then I'm this place on that continuum and other places here. But it's ongoing and lifelong. My new book is, I got to show you, a follow-up to White Fragility, Nice Racism, how progressive white people who feel real good about having a Black woman as their CEO can still perpetuate racial harm. So.
All right, we are at time. Let's do this again. Thank you for your time and your effort. Thank you for your talent. Thank you for writing this book. And it woke up a nation. It woke up a nation. It's not the only thing that we need to do, but it did help. So let's be in touch. And thank you so much. And to our listeners and to our audience, thank you as always for your attention and finding some time in the middle of the day to have a what I feel like has been a robust and informative and materially important conversation.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Robin.